Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who wish their breakups had been a little more theologically complicated. Each week we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And this week we are reading romance books. I guess we could shelve this into romance. It's Graham Greene's The End of the Affair. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really excited to explore with you how this fits in with the previous 4 books that we've read in this sequence. Because I think that there's a lot of overlaps in there, but it's also doing very interesting, very different things. So that's fun to talk about.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in, I want to do the same thing, Zach. We've gone through so many of these romance books now, Love Hypothesis or End of the Affair. But this time I'm really interested too in love and hate. There's so much about hate in this book. And I guess I'm curious, where does hate fit into a romance?
Yeah, he says love and hate come from the same glands. Oh my God. So let's see. What happens in this book? The story is told through the perspective of Maurice Bendrix, who is in an affair with Sarah Miles, or rather was in an affair, because when we start the story, it's very self-reflective. He's thinking back on his affair, but also what went wrong. And he has all these ideas about there being kind of like a third man, I guess you could say. There's someone else that she possibly left me for. So Sarah and her husband, Henry, are neighbors to Maurice. So he sees a lot of them. Eventually, her husband, Henry, comes to Maurice and says, "Hey, I think my wife's having an affair," putting, Maurice in kind of a sticky situation. But Maurice says, "Hey, I'll get a private detective and we will solve this." Yeah. So basically, that's like the first third of the book. The second third of the book is the discovery of the diary. And we get a real perspective shift here as the story turns into Sarah's perspective on all of the events that we have previously covered in the first third of the book. And then really the final third of the book is Maurice being like, "Oh, she always loved me. I always loved her. We're going to make it work." But unfortunately, it's not going to work because she's died. And then the story just kind of keeps going from there. Bob, is there anything I missed in this summary?
What a spoiler, Zach. Good thing we don't do spoilers. I think what you said was great. I think that's right on. The structure that you just mentioned, and you mentioned, comparing it to other books, it reminds me right away of Lost and Lassoed, where we have that kind of traditional romance of going back and forth between the hero and the heroine. So we get both perspectives. It's a little bit different in this because it is Bendrix looking back at the letters that he's received. But for us readers, it feels more like we're in the perspective of Bendrix than we're in the perspective of Sarah. And we can kind of see what they need from each other while they're not really telling each other. And we can see what's happening in their lives. So it reminds me a lot of the way that Lila Sage writes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that this kind of dueling perspectives works really well, especially in a book that's concerned with love. Any book that's concerned with love inevitably has multiple people with multiple perspectives about what's going on, but trying really to meet each other in the middle, trying to make it work. And it's so interesting how, Maurice, Mr. Bendrix, he's such a character, right? He's so filled with hate and resentment. And his perspective on Sarah is so one-dimensional. It's really interesting to see. He comes across as kind of, I don't want to say an icky character, but just kind of someone he's very idiosyncratic. I think that's the word I want to use. He's extremely idiosyncratic. But it's not until we get Sarah's perspective of everything that we really we get the sense at that point that his perspective is not the world, if that makes sense. He becomes truly just a character and not the world itself. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, I think, because we see more of his foibles as we get exposed to more characters. Is that what you're saying? He kind of becomes more rounded out, so he's more of an object in the story as addition to the narrator. Or
he becomes rounded out, but he also becomes his judgments on everything are not the final word, if that makes sense. Everything, for someone whose profession is a writer, every narrative that he thinks that he has found himself in, he is almost entirely wrong about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true.
So a good example of that, or I guess like the quintessential example of that, which the entire story hinges upon, is, the Germans are bombing. He goes downstairs to check on someone. He gets smashed when a bomb goes off. She checks on him and basically finds him dead, runs back upstairs. Now, from his perspective, he gets hit. He's a little hurt. He gets up. He goes upstairs. He sees her kneeling on the ground. So his perspective, he sees her kneeling on the ground. And then she says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're alive." She gets her clothes on and she leaves him forever after that. From her perspective, which we find out only later, she goes down, finds him dead, starts praying, "Hey, I'm not a believer, but if you let him live, or if he can come back to life, if I don't have to lose him, I will leave behind my life of infidelity and sin and yada, yada, and become a believing Christian, even though right now I do not believe in God." And lo and behold, he comes back up. So she says, "Okay, that's the end." So that's like the misunderstanding that everything hinges on, but it's one of so many examples of him thinking something is the case, but it really not quite being so.
I want to come back to that. I think that's very, very key, that one scene where the wall falls on him, he's trapped, she thinks that he's dead, and she prays. But I want to talk about his ickiness. I loved how you said icky, because I think he's very icky. He's easy to like, but he's also really hard to like. He's just so negative, and all he talks about is hating, 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 hating. He has many great insights into anything about one's life. So in that way, he's quite likable. He's also somewhat generous and likable and kind of cute in ways. But most of the time, he's so hateful. And I think he reminds me a lot of characters that we've seen like Heathcliff, where it's all about revenge. I hate you for revenge. He's not as directly violent as Heathcliff, but in his speech to us, he is. He's like, "I wish she was dead. I wish he was dead. I wish she was dead." Just planning all of these murders in his mind. Not planning them, but saying how much he hates people. I think that there are other characters around him, though, that make the story, because he's the narrator, so it's all through his eyes, unlike Heathcliff. So it would be more difficult to stick with Bendrix if we didn't have characters like Parkes and Parkes's boy, because that detective that he hires is just like the sweetest man ever, and he brings his little boy around with him, and they sit together and they have their little Coca-Cola while they watch Sarah Miles. I think with a character that he's not really detestable. He's just not really easy to like. He's very prickly. But I think when you have these other delightful characters, you have kind of the coziness that we've seen in some of these other romances like Lila Sage, where we have that everything is cozy, so any ups and downs, we can deal with them. This is such a down, 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 down. It's a spiraling down. But I think what brings us is the philosophical insight and also the cuteness of weird side characters. Did you find it hard? I mean, you said he's kind of likable, but also almost icky. How did the other characters, could they help you at all reading this book?
Well, I mean, I don't mean icky in the way that it made the book challenging to read. I just mean like if you met him in person, you would be like, "Oh, this is like a weird person." So, I mean, the whole setup of this book is basically he stopped seeing this person years ago, right? He hasn't talked to this person for like 2 years, but he is just dwelling and obsessed, really obsessed about why she stopped seeing him. It's almost like an affront to his ego, if that makes sense. Like there's something about it, and he has this like very obsessive quality that is really marked by jealousy. And the private detective calls this out immediately, and he says, "Oh, no, like no need to deny it." The detective basically says, "I think that jealousy is really the mark of true love. So if you're jealous of your lover, regardless of whether your lover is with you or not, if you're jealous of them, that means you're really in love with them." He just has this character about him that just ruminates and obsesses with, and does things that I think most people would say are slightly unethical, though, not in a bad way. I just mean like he's someone who would hire a private detective to essentially break into their house and steal her journal. You know what I mean? Like he's just a very idiosyncratic character.
borderline doing illegal things. He also doesn't have permission to get this PI to go into their relationship, Henry and Sarah's relationship, and that's a big sticking point with Henry. So he's up to all sorts of weird things. What do you think about, because in romances we found the journey, not just of the couple, but of the individuals and the problems that they have to be there kind of as supports for each other. And here, sometimes they are, but mostly they feel like antagonists to each other because the ways their lives are set up, they can't be together. Sarah is married, and Henry seems like Maurice's only friend, even though he's mean to him all the time. This is his only human connection are these two people. But their journey together seems, especially when Graham Greene's writing, it's a lot about finding God. But for Maurice, it's hating God no matter what, and then eventually hating Sarah so he doesn't have to lose Sarah. But for Sarah, it starts off on a pathway of hating God, making that deal. First not believing in God, then deciding, okay, I'm going to make a deal with you. If you save Maurice, I will believe. And then hating God for that situation. Now she can never actually be with him. She gets what she wants, but it ruins everything because it seals the deal of them never being together. So,
like a classic monkey paw story.
It's a monkey paw story, yes. It is like a monkey paw story. Does that help you in the way, like, does it feel romantic? Are they actually coming together, like overcoming this terrible monkey paw thing happens, but they both need to grow. Do they grow? Does the romance help them grow?
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think it's very romantic. I think it's very like interesting and exciting, and I think it's like very emotionally nuanced. I think the question of whether they grow is like very clear to me that I think that everyone grows. Everyone grows in their own ways. And maybe we could try to sketch this out because it's not exactly obvious in how they do. I think for Sarah, I think she grows in a kind of religious dimension. She has no religiosity, but then she makes this, I guess you could say, deal with God. In doing so, she basically sacrifices everything in order to have him back. But what we learn about her is she desperately tries to unbelieve herself. So like she visits Richard Smythe, a famous atheist, a rationalist, who, and every week she goes again and again and again to try to be talked out of her new belief in God. Because if she just doesn't believe anymore, then she can go back to him. But she believes, so she's made this deal with God, and she can't stop believing, no matter how hard she tries. I think that's really interesting. But what you see with her is this kind of like sanctification, if that makes sense. Like all these like minor miracles that happen. So like not only is there the like, maybe coming back to life of the main character, but Richard Smythe has this deformity on his face. He has some spots there. And then one day they disappear. And at first he says, oh, it's just this like electric shock thing. But, but then he calls back later and he says, I have to tell you, they just cleared up overnight. I think it's and he hangs up the phone before he can say the word, I think it's a miracle. But, our last scene with her and him was her kissing those spots. You know what I mean? Like there's an element of maybe her touch, her some element of her was possibly able to heal, the wounded or the deformed or whatever. I don't know. So her movement to me is becoming almost this like religious figure, like an apotheosis or something. She becomes holy. She becomes holy.
I would definitely agree. There's the other miracle with Lance, because, the private eye, his son is dying. Well, they don't know, but he's got terrible, terrible stomach pains. They think it might be appendicitis. And he says, well, I don't want to go to the hospital yet. My wife was killed under the knife. Let's just wait, doctor. Can we just wait? His son's temperature gets higher and higher and higher. And he asks, this is after Sarah dies, but he asks Henry, my boy really liked, it's a weird thing because he has to admit, like, I know your wife, but he can't say why he knows his wife, because he's been following her all this time. He says, please, can I have something of your wife's? My boy really, really, really loved her. I don't really know why. She was a nice lady, but he just loved her. So he gives him a book. He says, take this home. The next morning, the boy is miraculously recovered, and in the cover of the book, she would always write little poems in her books as a kid, and it said something like, "If you have this, I got this book when I was sick. If you get it too, I hope you get just as healthy again as I did." And the boy describes it as, "Sarah came to me and healed me." So he sees her appear. He says, she's a really interesting saint figure. She also talks a lot about pain. Bendrix talks so much about hate. Hate, 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 hate. She ends up talking a lot about pain because she can't bear the pain that she's caused Henry and the pain that she's caused Bendrix, and now this pain of not being able to be with Maurice Bendrix. And when she goes to the church, she sees Jesus up on the cross, and she says, "Can I get up on that cross just like you? If only I could suffer like you, then I could believe in you." So she needs a pain, almost like a saint is willing to accept pain for their belief. She needs the pain for her belief. So I think, she's a very interesting character in a romance.
Do you think Bendrix changed?
Good question. I don't know. At the end, he refuses to change. At the very end, I think the last line, what is it? Oh, yeah. He says, "Oh God, you've done enough. You've robbed me of enough. I'm too tired and old to learn to love. Leave me alone forever." So I feel like he's refusing to change, but he has learned to... No, I don't think he's changed at all. He's still being mean to Henry, even though they have this cute relationship after she's died, and they're just living together now. They're just roommates. But he still is getting angry all the time. He doesn't really accept her death, and he decides it's much better for me to hate you than to have to miss you. I don't know. I don't think he grows.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I think I personally lean on the side of he has changed.
Okay.
And in two main ways. One of which is, you already said his relationship with Henry. He suddenly has a kind of fraternity about him. He moves out of his house because Henry says, "Oh, my house is so empty. And, I'm just so alone. It would be so nice to be with someone who also loved her." You know what I mean? Like Henry's so, well-meaning, I guess you could say. Like he knows, he knows everything that happened, but he's like, "You know what? You loved her. I loved her. Let's just be together,"
Speaking of
so
saints,
they move in together, and they immediately become like so domestic. Like he talks about how the breakfast is set, and it's so weird. Henry wasn't there for breakfast. He's usually always there for breakfast. And they had this schedule of like, we always go to the same pub together and talk, every weeknight or whatever. I think that I sense in that a very significant shift in the way that he interacts with other people, in the sense that he's become much more domestic and much more regular and much more fraternal. He's still kind of a little, he's a stinker. He's a stinker for sure, but I do sense a huge shift in that. But then in terms of love, I mean, let's think about where he was at the start of the novel. He was sleeping with his closest neighbor's wife for a long, long time in their house while he was there. She dies, and he's on the way to the funeral, and he picks up some random girl with the intent to sleep with her and takes this girl to Sarah's funeral. You know what I mean? Like he's still a horn dog, I guess we'll say. He's still a bad boy. He's still a horn dog. But what happens to him is that he finds that, like, with the girl, like the mom steps in. Well, like, okay, so with the girl, he ends up not actually doing anything with her, but also with like a prostitute later. He says he can't do anything. And he describes it as impotence, but he also describes it in another way. He says that the experience of love kills the appetite for lust forever. So once you've been in love, you can't really truly lust after anyone after that. And I think that for someone whose entire being was defined by that lust and all the things that he associates with lust, which is jealousy and hatred. So he's just a bundle of three really negative emotions. He's managed to somehow turn that around through the experience, the transformative experience of love, which could be argued is yet another miracle that that Sarah has performed.
I wonder though. So I think he falls in love as soon as he meets Sarah. So his lust, I don't know exactly what it is like before her, but then once he meets her, that lust has been cured except for her, you know. So whether or not she's dead, he can't lust anymore. For his love, I think it has to be a real change, and I think we can argue about this and figure it out. For real change, I think he does have to, for Graham Greene, come to God, and I think he's still refusing. And the weird connection to hate, we've talked about Night of the Hunter before. Have you seen that? I can't remember if you've seen...
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, it's a classic old movie, and it's Robert Mitchum. And so Robert Mitchum, do you know the tattoos on hands where it says love and hate?
Yeah.
Comes from this movie. And so he does this speech where he says, let me tell you the old story about right hand, left hand. Cain struck down his brother Abel with the left hand, H-A-T-E. Right. And anyway, so then he goes like this, and he's fighting right hand and left hand, good and evil. And he says, good eventually triumphs. But then he's trying to rob these two kids blind of all their inheritance. But it makes me think of the same idea of, for Bendrix, love and hate become so tied for him so he doesn't have to grow. I feel like it's a complex almost. He can't just accept that he loves and can't get what he wants. He has to hate because he can't get what he wants. So they're stuck forever. They're in that conflict, always back. And Robert Mitchum is going to be doing this for years, you know. But if he had decided, I don't know what he has to decide. He has to decide something, but he can't decide, I hate God. And I hate Sarah. He hates everything, and he's hated everything that this experience has tried to teach him. So even though he's got this little friendship now, he also is very willing, it seems, to throw that friendship away. He's domesticated, and he's in the habit. But he even jumps on him when they invite the priest over, and the priest is saying, why didn't we have a Catholic burial? He jumps on both of them and just leaves. So he has plenty of opportunities to grow, and he refuses them. Like, he's very stubborn.
Well, this is part of what I was saying about how, I'm thankful for the other perspectives in the story, because it turns it from, like, his perspective being the world to just his perspective being his character. Because through the interactions of other people with him, we can see just how small-minded he is. And it's through the interactions and, like, the way that the story unfolds that we can clearly see how he's transformed, but he hasn't transformed enough. Like, he grows, but the structure of the narrative itself, the themes of the book mean that he remains deeply flawed. But because we as readers can see the themes of the book, we have that value system in which to apply to him, because we have people like Sarah, or even possibly Henry, but more so Sarah, as the kind of yardstick by which every other character is judged.
So, okay, speaking of yardsticks, I think that's a very good way to put this, and maybe we can help ourselves a little bit. I'm wondering, is he kind of a satanic character because he refuses to ever acknowledge goodness, or refuses to acknowledge what he's supposed to? I think if we look at Smythe, that might help us a lot, because Smythe is, a devout atheist. He's even speaking, I think he's publishing articles about atheism. And after the miracle occurs, he seems to believe, or at least when Bendrix asks him, you don't believe that, do you? He says, well, I don't know what I believe anymore. So he's starting to doubt his atheism and maybe turning towards God, which I think for Greene would be a success here, even though I think he called himself an agnostic Catholic, which I don't really know exactly what that means. But anyway, if we look at Smythe, someone who is so atheist, is he succeeding in a way by overcoming his atheism here? Like, in the context of this book, is Smythe becoming a Christian, where the book wants to push its characters. And if Bendrix cannot do that, and he's contrasted with Smythe because those are the two outside lovers, does it show that Smythe is the better man, or is it more like Wuthering Heights, where his hate and his commitment to their relationship and to their love, whether it's hate or love, the intensity of it, does that make him the better man? In like, if we're looking at a love triangle, let's be a love square here.
Yeah.
If we go Twilight, are you team? Yeah.
That's a really good question, because I guess I would have to probably try to define what, to get back to the first thing you asked, like who's the satanic character, and what does it mean to be a satanic character in these kind of stories? My initial reaction is to think that there's no satanic characters in here, but that there's varying shades of human characters, and by human they're like all fallen, if that makes sense. I think it's clear with Smythe that his skin problems are really the psychological origin of his philosophical atheistic stance, if that makes sense. I mean, it's never explicitly laid out, but it seems to be really the defining characteristic of him. He carries himself in a way when he's in public, or like when he's meeting people for the first time, where he turns his face on one side so that they can't see his affliction. And he's very touchy about it. He holds a lot of resentment. He thinks that no one can love him. And just kind of reading into his speech, you have to understand that if he was a real person, he would have been made fun of and mocked relentlessly as a child. You can kind of like, through these like very vague sketches of him and what he says, you can really build out the psychological portrait. And I can't help but feel like the missing ingredient of his life is love. And because he missed that, he has fallen into this atheism. There's no God. There can't be a God because I myself have never experienced love. It's not until Sarah gives him love, and it's not sexual love. It's just valuing him as a person, being there for him, talking to him week after week, that he is finally able to understand what that feels like. And I feel like that's part of his transformation, even before his face clears up.
So, okay, if his face, he sees the miracle, his face clears up and he believes. So he's been an atheist all his life, maybe because, I don't know, he didn't want to believe in God, or maybe because he's bullied so much that he couldn't believe in anything like that. So then when he sees the miracle, he accepts. However, when Bendrix hears about both miracles, he refuses. He just hangs up. He won't even hear what Smythe has to say. I wonder, when we read Shusaku Endo's Silence, we thought a lot about, okay, who is the real Catholic here? If you give up on Christ and if you step on the fumee, are you giving up everything? Who is the one really willing to risk it all? These two Portuguese priests who come over, they have a lot of big talk. When it comes down to it, we were wondering, okay, are they trying to save themselves and renouncing God to save themselves and sacrifice everyone else? Or are they trying to save others, these Japanese converts? So are they heroic or are they cowardly? I wonder, too, because the priest talks a lot about Judas. He says, well, okay, why on earth did Jesus want Judas around him? He's just going to betray him in the end. But he ultimately said, okay, well, Jesus talks to him in this book, and he says, I have Judas around me so that he was suffering and I needed to help him. I just needed to help him. He was someone who was suffering greatly. But I think also there's a point to say that someone had to betray Jesus to make Christianity happen. I wonder, do you think that Bendrix could be this satanic character who just refuses, to accept that humans have been created and that we all have flaws? He just hates it. And he says, no, I'm not going to believe in creation. I hate it forever. Or is he more of a Judas character who, in a weak moment, betrays and is very necessary for Christianity in this book, at least the conversion of Sarah and Smythe? In the context of a romance, is he good for Sarah and her goal towards conversion, or is he bad for Sarah and her goal for conversion? Obviously, he doesn't believe in it, but as a kind of other,
as a tool
for her, as a tool, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So I think, great questions. I think that, I like what you're saying about him as a tool for her, because what she says is she had not experienced love before she met him. And God, one of the words he uses to describe her, and I think she might even self-describe, is she has a sense of like abandonment of self. And he talks about this while they're having sex, but like that self-abandonment that happens there, I feel like is part of a larger trajectory of her through the catalyst of first meeting him and then their love affair. But I mean, it's hard because, when you say satanic character, for me, I have like a very Milton idea of who Satan is, and that's like rebellion, and that is selfishness, and it's not quite like, let's see. So there's rebellion and there's selfishness and there's pride, which I associate with satanicness. But then like some of the other words that could be thrown in that I don't associate with satanicness are, these words like hate or lust or envy or jealousy. I associate those with much more human traits. I see those as like fundamentally human traits more so than satanic. But I think it might be just a question of we're not seeing eye to eye on what the terms are. And keep in mind, I guess, that neither of us are particularly that well read into Christian theology, but yeah, I mean, let me know. I mean, so I guess if I say that, Satan, pride, rebellion, things like that, and humanity, jealousy, hate, lust, how do you feel about that distinction? Are we on the same page?
I think we're on the same page. I think when I'm calling him satanic, it's because he refuses. Satan does too. It's pride in saying, no, I will not participate. I don't believe that I should have to serve humanity. I am a higher creation, so I'm not going to buy into that, no matter what you say. He says the same thing. I'm not going to feel these emotions. I'm not going to experience creation because it's so painful. I can't believe you would do this to me. Why would you do that? You can't exist, or I don't like you. I think he starts to believe in God, and he just says, no, I believe in you now, but I still hate you. So I feel like he's satanic in that sense. And I think, how we were saying that maybe he's a tool for her. I think his hate and his jealousy are tools for his pride. He is using those things as kind of a power to stay stalwart. Earlier, we did an episode, and you mentioned Jesus out in the desert, and when Satan tempts Jesus 3 times, and Jesus says no. There's a similar story with the Buddha. But I feel like he is using not contemplation of God, but contemplation of hate to remain in that prideful position that Milton Satan would also be in, of no, I will not agree with I will not buy what you're selling, that thing.
Yeah. Okay. Then in that case, I do agree with you. I think you're really onto something there. I guess in line with, the hate and the jealousy that he feels towards those he loves, I really want to contrast this with any of the numerous like strict romance genre books that we've read. Because one of the things that was so interesting to me was that in my mind, I don't think we've ever seen anything other than just pure unadulterated love as being the driving like erotic factor, I guess you could say, between two people. And if you consider, like, I feel comfortable lumping these books together because they're all about love. You know what I mean? But this is not a book about love where everything turns out okay in the end. And yet fundamentally, there's still something that ties this book to the other books that we've read in this sequence.
Again, I think when we read romance a long time ago for the first time and we included Wuthering Heights, I think it's very, very similar to that kind of love, where it's not a sane love, it's not a balanced love, it's not a healthy love, it's intensity that you can't control and that takes control of you. It's like love possesses you, and it can be just the intensity that possesses you. So it can equally be love, it can equally be hate. I think when we look at what we've read this time, the most similar one, I think maybe Danielle Steele, Betrayal, because that's all about betrayal and how you have to keep your life going or how you have to pick up the pieces and try to keep going. But to me, the writing and the interest in two opposite characters, two main characters in the story who form that romance. It still reminds me a lot of Lila Sage, whereas hers was, okay, positive character plus positive character with a few problems are going to work out their differences and come together as a stronger unit. Here, it's a triangle with an extra weird guy on the side, and then everyone melts down, but somehow life goes on. I guess it's so much messier, and you don't come away feeling, yeah, I get it. And you don't come away feeling, yes, romance is good. You come away feeling, oh, life hurts. So I don't know. I don't know what I would...
Life hurts.
Would you compare it to any of the books we've read?
Well, I guess I would say that for most modern romances, what this book made me realize is that most of these books are coming from the perspective of like someone's first love, if that makes sense. Like it's never worked out for me before, but I finally found the right person. And if we can just make it work, then we will have our happily ever after. So we just read Allie Hazelwood's The Love Hypothesis. This is a person who's not been particularly, like sexual or in a relationship, before meeting her person. Or, most of these Lila Sage novels, people have pasts, people have histories, but it's always framed as kind of like flings, not love, capital L, until they meet the subject of this story. I think that what's exciting about this book, and I think very, very interesting, is that these are characters with pasts. Like this, so like Sarah on her hand is married, which, it's not a particularly loving marriage, and yet it's still a big roadblock. It's still heavy emotional baggage, something to feel guilty over at the very least. But for our main character, for Bendrix, it doesn't seem like he's the kind of person who has any kind of illusions, if that makes sense. He doesn't feel like he doesn't treat love the same way as any of the other romance characters. And it seems like he's been in love many times in his life. He has a long history of it. And this is special because she's special and the relationship is special. And yet, I don't know, it doesn't feel romanticized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he doesn't believe in Valentine's Day.
No.
He wouldn't be buying a Valentine's Day card. I think it does make sense. And, it'd be interesting since this is if we had any romance readers who watched us, they would know, okay, the 4 previous books were romance. This is almost offensive to the genre romance. It's not usually shelved in romance, but it doesn't end in a happily ever after. Romances should end in a happy for now or happily ever after or happy for now. And this does not. But it is a love that I guess rocks these characters. It totally knocks them off their feet. In that sense, it's romantic. It's all the intensity that we associate with falling in love or romance, but it's that intensity. It's that intensity for the entirety of their relationship. So they never get into the coziness that we see in a Lila Sage novel of, okay, all of the awkwardness is kind of gone now, or in Love Hypothesis, now we can kind of relax because now we're more of a normal couple. And we'll have some ups and downs, but it's not always like walking on a hot tin roof or like trying to walk a tightrope. This is a tightrope for years and years and years. How can you possibly sustain that? You can't. She dies.
Yeah.
It's too much for one body to take, and it kills them, just like it kills the characters in Wuthering Heights. This kind of romance is dangerous. And in that way, it's kind of attractive as a reader. It's dramatic, it's tragic, but you have to, I don't want to say you have to keep turning the pages, but it just feels very necessary, I guess. It feels very real in a way, even if it's not like everyone's experience. There's something that's very, hits you deep in the depths.
Well, I guess I would say also that there's like a democratic component of all romance novels, like mainline romance novels we've read, in the sense that when it comes to your first love or these feelings of like finding the perfect person, I think that's something that everyone can can experience or imagine themselves experiencing at least one time in their life. They can put themselves in the shoes of every protagonist that we have read so far, with the possible exception of Daniel Steele's Betrayal, but I'll put an asterisk besides that book. But most of these protagonists we can see ourselves in. This book, however, is so idiosyncratic. This is a individual, and I have nothing in common with this individual. I hope you have nothing in common with this individual, but I won't speak for you. And yet, despite those differences in who this character is and who I am, I feel like I'm with this character every single step of the way. I'm feeling with them. I'm struggling with them. I'm hating with them, I guess you could say even. But it's just so interesting to write a character that's not in every man in the romance, or in every woman, or in every person in a romance novel. That to me is one of the biggest differences.
It's got "I'm every woman" in my head. It reminds me a lot when we read, King Lear, and we read Hamlet, and William Hazlitt says Hamlet is everyone. So every reader is Hamlet. Every actor wants to be Hamlet. King Lear is a very particular kind of person, and that's a full ensemble cast where everyone is kind of their own archetype. You have to already kind of be like that person to act them. But Hamlet is anyone. I feel like that's the same case here as Bendrix. None of us are really like Bendrix, but there's something attractive in reading his opinion, reading what he's going through as he explains it to us, to the point where we feel like we are Bendrix, or at least we're in Bendrix's shoes. I would agree with you. I want to ask you about one quote that I saw Bendrix saying, and it kind of always comes back to, it's always teetering on the edge, okay, of who am I really hating? And he says, if I hate her so much as I sometimes do, how can I love her? Can one really hate and love, or is it only myself that I really hate? I wonder if it is just himself that he hates, and that's why he decides to hate God too. But in addition to that, I'm wondering what is with his revenge? Because it seems like over the top to hate her and refuse her the Catholic burial. What do you think? Why is he so upset about the Catholic burial?
I think this, all right, so this is a great question. I don't know the answer, and I can only speculate, but I think that he's so concerned about the third man. Who is she cheating on me with? And he thinks it's Smythe. It's not Smythe. He doesn't know what to think. But then it kind of turns out that the third man is actually God. So she has found God. And I suspect that just the dynamic of her leaving him for God is offensive to his pride and to his ego. So therefore he refuses to accept it. And every evidence of that happening, he denies. So actually, what I would compare this to actually is when he has the detective build the dossier on her, and he gives it to Henry finally. And Henry turns around and throws it right in the fire. He doesn't read it. Yeah. He refuses to accept it, probably because it would hurt his pride. However, we find out from the diaries, he goes home that night and he cries and he says, "Don't leave me," yada, yada, yada. She says, "Oh, I'll never leave you," yada, it was a whole thing. But his initial reaction of throwing the evidence in the fire and outright rejecting it and then leaving is, I think, fundamentally the same emotional reaction that Bendrix has upon any evidence that she has been cheating on him, quotes, cheating on him with God. And that would include she was baptized at the age of 2 or whatever. And he's just like, no. Oh, she was seeing a Catholic priest asking about the faith. Just because she had an intellectual interest in religion doesn't mean that she wanted to become a Catholic. Yet, things like that. Every step of the way, including writing off miracles as as mere coincidences, anything to prevent his ego from being hurt more.
I think it's in her diary, and then he later muses on it, but I thought this quote was very interesting where she's saying, maybe it's him talking at this point, but he says, I'm going to rob you, God, of what you love most in me. I've never known the Lord's Prayer by heart, but I remember that one. Is it a prayer of what you love most in me? What do you love most? If I believed in you, I suppose I believe in the immortal soul. But is that what you love? I wonder if it sounds petty to everyone that he is not respecting her religion because he says, well, she was never even that religion. But I think it's much bigger because he is starting to believe in God at this point. And so he says, okay, if you took her away from me, I'm going to take what you love most from her away from her. He doesn't care about the soul anymore. He cares about the personality. And he's going to take the soul away from God so the soul can't go back. And that's kind of a lot of hate. So in loving her and not wanting to give her up, he also dooms her because he's starting to believe, it feels like, in Catholicism. So he dooms her immortal soul because he loves her so much. It's very chilling. Again, very Heathcliff.
I do like how the priest basically assures him that him trying to cremate her, despite what everyone around her was saying, basically won't have the intended effect that he thinks it will. Like like the priest is basically like, of course you can still go to heaven, or of course you not go to heaven, but experience like resurrection or whatever, even after cremation. Obviously it would be a big problem for lots and lots of people throughout history if that wasn't the case. But you also kind of have to read it another way, which is that he doesn't believe in God, so he wants to ensure that she won't go to heaven so that wherever he goes after death, she will be there with him, if that makes sense. He's a character. He is
very Heathcliff.
He's such a character. Well, we are wrapping up all this entire romance segment. I loved it. I loved pretty much almost every book we read. At least I thought every book we read was very, very interesting. When we do this again, what do you want to see more of?
Definitely more Jane Austen. We got to read the last Lila Sage book, so those will definitely be on there. Anything like this, I think this was great. Graham Greene's always a hit. But I guess anything that's a little bit, not darker, but just that is a little outside of our normal experience. It goes a little bit outside the genre, I guess, or participates in it, but is its own thing.
I'm reminded of when we read Eileen Jong's Lust Caution, just because it partially fits in with the romance genre and yet it stands slightly apart. The themes feel a little bit more adult. The stakes aren't just love, but they're also like, you know, what is love's relationship to this other outside thing? I want to see more of that. I don't at this moment know exactly where to look. So if any viewers have any recommendations for us on where to go next for the romance genre, something that can blend in, you know, Eileen Jong with Graham Greene and, you know, just explore that corner of the bookiverse, then I think we'll be two happy readers, eh? All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.